So let's talk today about the tyranny of leadership in Africa. We're going to use South Sudan as a specific case to explain what is the tyranny of leadership in Africa. So there is something bad happening in South Sudan that can explain the notion of the tyranny of leadership in Africa. So precisely what happened in South Sudan is that the budget of the medical team of the President Salva Kiir is more than the national budgets of health for the whole country of South Sudan. So I want you, my South Sudanese brothers, my South Sudanese comrades, please gather here. Let's talk about what is going on in your country, right? Let's talk about this, because we cannot talk about the change if we don't look at some of these things and why they do happen, right? How can the spending, the health spending, right, of one individual, whether he is the president or the minister or a civilian, why can that be, or why should that be more than the budget of the whole country? This is what we are trying to talk about today, just quickly to understand or to have some ideas of where we are supposed to take this struggle and who is really the true enemy that we need to fight first before we can go further. So before we start, peace and love, freedom and decolonization to all African people, those at home, those abroad, and those in the future. If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword. If you have two trousers, please sell one and buy a sword, because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is no longer on the streets. This revolution is not about burning cars, but is about building our own cars and selling them to make money. Essentially, this revolution is in the mind, because if we are not in charge of our mind, the enemy will take control of our mind and will use our bodies as tools of self-enslavement and self-destruction. So, once again, I welcome you to our weekly edition where we talk about our affairs. I'm talking about African affairs in our agenda. My name is King Kabbalah from the African Continental Unity Party. Please receive our revolutionary greetings. So, there have been some disturbing news or revelation recently about South Sudan. According to some UN reports, UN Commission report, which has revealed that in Sudan, the summary of that report says that between the year 2020 and 2024, apparently, in South Sudan, the medical team of the President Salva Kiir has spent about 557 million US dollars. Right? This is like the budget of the spending of the medical team of the president. In the meantime, the national budget, right, of health for the whole country is about 29 million US dollars. So you look at 557 US dollars to 29 million US dollars. You see the difference. So this 500 is spent on one individual, the President Salva Kiir, while the 12 million, because South Sudan is a 12 million country, those people have to share or have to deal with 29 million. So now, when you take 29 million, let's do some few calculations here. So you take 29 million US dollars, right? You divide by 12 million of the population, so you get something like $2.40 per one individual. Now, what is important is that in Sudan, in South Sudan, or in any African country actually, there's a need, especially for children, for vaccination. So for the entire year, right, in any African country, to bring all the immunization, all the things that kids need in order to grow, the expense for one kid, of course, in the entire year is about 73 US dollars. So the allocation of the health department or health ministry, the allocation of fund to the health ministry in Sudan or South Sudan, right, is about 29 million US dollars. When you divide it by 12 million people, you get something like $2.40 instead of 73 to cover the entire year process of immunization, vaccines, all these things that kids want in order to prevent them from various diseases. So you have an individual by himself consuming 557 million US dollars. And if this money can be divided, right, if you have the budget of 557 million US dollars and divide it by 12 million, you have at least something like approximately 46 US dollars, right, allocation to a single person in South Sudan, which is most significant because it can allow a decent healthcare, right, and medical treatment for those who are sick in Sudan. And mostly, there are a lot of advantages when people are properly taken care of in terms of medical care. You have the manpower. You have people who can live longer. You have kids in good health. And with this budget of $2.40, right, you have a sick population, and most importantly, a population who cannot be effective in the labor, in the markets to produce the things that, or the goods that the country needs or the world needs. So this is what is happening, or this is what the President Salva Kiir is doing to the Sudanese people, is depriving the future of this country, because we know that the majority of the people in South Sudan are young people, are the youth. And this majority of young people who cannot have a proper health care because all the money is taken by one tyrant to treat himself, to take care of himself and of his family probably. These people, when they get sick, they're going to treat themselves, and then they find themselves in a situation where the country where they are supposed to live becomes like a hell. So can you tell me, can the kids growing up in South Sudan today have a hope or have their vision of the future based on the country, or they will be wanting to go overseas to look better because in Sudan is like a hell? And do you think that any parents will be willing to leave their children, spend their lives or their youth life in a country which cannot take care of them, medically speaking? So this is the challenge that we have on the continent, but not just in South Sudan. We have the same thing in Cameroon, in Congo, in Nigeria, where we have tyrants in leadership who have transformed the country as their own backyard farms, where they can do whatever they want to do. They cannot be accountable for their misuse of funds, for their looting of resources. But the most important question that I have about all of this is, why do we tolerate this kind of situation? Why, my dear South Sudanese brothers and sisters, why do we accept this kind of treatment in a country which is supposed to be our collective heritage, our collective, right, heritage or property? Why do we allow one individual to take our lives and our future into hostage because of his own well-being? The entire people has to be decimated because of the lack of funds to treat them when they are sick, while one individual goes away with lots of millions for himself. What does he do actually for Sudan? So this is pretty much the tyranny of leadership, as I was talking about. So the point, as I said, the question is really, why do we allow this? There's only one reason. I mean, there can be many, but I think in my judgment, there's one fundamental reason that can allow a tyrant or a group of tyrants to take the whole country into hostage, right? As what we see in South Sudan right now, because this is exactly taking the future of the entire population into hostage for the present satisfaction of one individual. So the question, as I said, is why do we allow this, and how did we come to live with this? The reason is fear. That's the reason why I spoke from the beginning, saying that if we are not in charge of our mind, whoever who takes control of our mind will only put fear in our mind so that we can be terrified to even stand up and speak for our rights. We can be terrified to even think about our rights in midst of oppression, in midst of the suffering that our people go through in South Sudan. When you are terrified, when you have been indoctrinated with fear, you are prone to be acquiescent to any kind of domination, exploitation, and oppression. And that's exactly what we see in South Sudan. And the only way people accept these conditions is when they have been totally turned upside down, inside out, through a process of indoctrination, which has allowed them to be in a state of fear where they cannot even recognize their rights or fight for them or stand up for them. And this is the predicament of Africa today, because when you go back, you see that Salva Kiir is a product of the United States of America. He was brought into power through the support of the US in 2011 when South Sudan broke from the Sudan to become a single country. And that was all, as I said, through the support of the United States of America and some Western countries. The aim was actually to take control of the rich oil reserves of the South Sudanese people, right? It's all about it. It's all about taking control of the resources. And in order to do that effectively, you have to divide, you have to fragment people, you have to break them into small groups of people that then you can be able to control, to manage easily. And this is what happened in South Sudan. Now, just like in any other country on the continent, what we see is that for a particular person to become to that position of leadership, he has to be there with the blessing of the United States or of former colonial powers or other Western countries. If he's not there with their blessing, he's going to be sanctioned, like what we see in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. If he's not there with their blessing, he's going to be even assassinated. And we've seen that with Patrice Lumumba, with Thomas Sankara, with all these leaders that we have lost on the continent. So this whole situation has created the condition of whoever comes to power in Africa is already put in that space of fear of the West. Actually, the questions that go through his mind is that if I don't do what the Western countries expect me to do, they can sanction me, they can blackmail me, they can assassinate me, they can do ABC to me, which I don't want to experience. So he will be prone to please the Western countries. He will try his best to please the Western countries and to align himself with their policies. And that means he will be looting the resources of the country to invest in the West. Because when you look in South Sudan, of course, you will see that this money is mostly spent in medical facilities outside of the country. It's not even spent in the country. And this is what happens in Congo, Nigeria, all these countries. These people will try their best to please or to have friends with the Western individuals or Western powers, because they know that if they don't have friends there, they can face some bad consequences. So in meantime, they deprive their own people. They don't look after their own people. Why? Because they don't feel the same threat from their own population. They don't feel the danger from their own population. So when the army is equipped, when the police is equipped properly, it's not to protect the country against any external enemy or so forth and so on. No, is to frighten the population, is to terrify the population and to keep them in the state of fear. That is what happens in Africa. That's why I call it the tyranny of leadership. So this is possible because we don't constitute a kind of threat to our leaders. And that's the reason why when they are in power, the only thing that preoccupies their mind is how can they keep a good relationship with the United States of America, with France, with England, but not with their own population. So for this situation to change, for this tyranny to end, there must be a challenge coming from the population. In other words, we must organize ourselves as a people in order to constitute a threat to our leaders so that they can realize that if they don't do what the people expect them to do, they can face the same consequence which they are thinking to be facing if they don't do what the Westerners expect them to do. In other words, they must find themselves in the middle of threats on both sides, from the side of the people, from the side of Western imperialist powers, so that whoever who must remain in power has to remain there by knowing clearly that he has to satisfy the people as much as he's trying to satisfy his boyfriends overseas. Otherwise, he can be sanctioned either by the people or by those who pushed him to power. So this calls for functioning and properly working organizations in our countries. We cannot change this status quo if we have to rely on the morality of our leaders to change one day and begin to do the right thing. That cannot happen. Actually, you cannot expect justice in a country that is governed by criminals like Salva Kiir. So for justice to happen, we, the masses, are the ones who are supposed to bring about the justice. And that's why we talk about unity and organization. So if you are not organized, you are going to always face the same fate that these tyrants reserve for us. So it is time for my brothers and sisters in South Sudan to rise up, to organize, and to declare the fall of Salva Kiir. Salva Kiir must fall in South Sudan. All the tyrants in Africa, Salva Kiir, Paul Biya, all these tyrants must fall. In Congo-Brazzaville, the tyrants must fall. In DRC, tyrants must fall. In Africa, we don't want to see tyrants anymore. And for that to happen, we need to organize. So we want organization. We want organizations all across the continent. We want organizations in South Sudan. Young people in South Sudan, rise up, stand up, organize yourself, and kick out of your country and out of power the dictator and the tyrant Salva Kiir, and recuperate your power and bring your country in a space where it benefits to all of you, so that your oil, your resources can benefit you, so that you don't have to run away from your country, but you have to look at it as a paradise, and to actually live that paradise as you are living, and make sure that your kids live in the same paradise. So, peace and love, freedom and decolonization to all African people, those at home, those abroad, and those in the future. If you have two shoes, please sell one and buy a sword, because now it is time for revolution. And this revolution is in the mind. We thank you and we see you next time. Bye-bye.